Unit 4 is all about the ways in which Appalachia came to be directly connected to national markets and the national urban and industrial culture, and how that had a profound influence upon the people and the environment of Appalachia. A couple observations will be useful at this early point in this unit. Number one is that this unit doesn't necessarily follow in chronological order from the previous unit. Indeed, when you're really considering the industrialization of Appalachia, you have to take a long historic point of view. This unit covers a period of time from roughly 1830 all the way up to 1930. So about 100 years. And if you look down through our reading list, you'll see there's a considerable amount of reading for this unit and a number of different topics. However, within that period of time, there's a couple things from the outset that we can look at and that we could use as markers, as ways to divide up the topics within this unit. Of course, one way to break up that 100-year period is the Civil War. Really, there's two patterns of industrialization. One pattern that happened before the Civil War and one pattern that happened after the Civil War. Okay. If you look at the pattern before the Civil War, there's even another way you can break it up. Before the Civil War, some historians have observed that there are really two Appalachias that emerged prior to the Civil War. By that, what we mean is that there is two social, political, and economic patterns of development that occurred in the Appalachian region. One pattern we already took a look at in the second unit of the semester, the unit that dealt with the settlement of the Appalachian frontier. In some places in Appalachia, unreliable access to unreliable markets created a society and an economy that were geared more towards subsistence, self-reliance, and some interactions with markets, but with goods that got to market in an easier way. For example, the cattle industry. Other examples would be, for example, the timber industry. Some timber, some hardwood, some pines do float, and along the riverways of Appalachia, there developed a small timber industry. The second pattern of development concerns us more in this unit. In places in Appalachia where there was reliable access to reliable markets, there was a second, more urban pattern, a more industrial pattern of development. And of course, those places that did have reliable access to reliable markets fell largely along riverways. The city of Wheeling. Yeah, Wheeling is a great example of this historic pattern. I'll put up a link for a document that describes Wheeling in 1830. By 1830, Wheeling on the Ohio River had a very significant iron industry and a host of secondary manufacturers of iron, including one of the most significant nail manufacturing industries in North America at that time. And as you know, Wheeling now does have a semi-pro hockey team named the Nailers, and they take their name from that part of Wheeling's history. Not only that, but Wheeling also had a significant population of middle-class merchants who were providing all sorts of services to a large, growing industrial population. Wheeling was a very significant city. But not just along the Ohio River, but along the Tennessee River and some other major rivers within the Appalachians. There were major cities that did develop and had an industrial base. And really much of the readings for this unit will deal with those areas and what happened in those areas. So all that happened prior to the Civil War. So prior to the Civil War, there's these two patterns of economic, social, and political development that occurred. The Civil War, as we saw, really consumed a lot of the region's resources and attentions. Some of the developments that occurred prior to the Civil War were basically put on hold for the Civil War. For example, railroad expansion saw a very significant period of development prior to the Civil War. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, for example, was completed to Wheeling in 1853. However, no major railroads were really launched until after the Civil War had ended. The next major railroad, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, which cut across the southern half of our state, West Virginia, and along the Kanawha Valley, wasn't completed to Huntington until 1873. After the Civil War, the completion of a region-wide network of railroads was completed, and it happened in fits and starts. It wasn't necessarily a consistent pattern, but nonetheless, by 1890 and 1900, there was a region-wide system of railroads that connected the region to national markets. This created a second explosion that really eclipsed that first period of industrial development. All within about a 20 to 30 year period, there was a number of linked, interrelated industrial processes that happened. First, of course, the railroads were completed, and again, it happened more or less by 1900. There were some major railroads built after 1900, however. But anyways, the railroad industry sparked the timber industry. In 1880, for example, 2/3 of West Virginia was covered still in virgin timber that was inaccessible to any sort of riverways. And even then, if it had access to riverways, some hardwoods simply don't float. Only railroads can take them out. 1880, 2/3 of the state was covered in that sort of virgin timber. By 1920, it was all gone. And I mean completely denuded. So it was a very, very intense period of cutting of the virgin forest that happened really because of the railroad. Another thing that the railroad sparked is the coal industry. Of course, prior to this period of time, the coal industry was important, but it was largely localized. And of course, you need railroads to pull coal out of Appalachia and put it into a national marketplace. And the completion of the railroad network allowed this to happen. So after the Civil War, there was an increase of industrial development, and it happened at a very rapid pace. Finally, lastly, another major theme that we're looking at in this unit is how the industrialization of Appalachia in this 100-year stretch of time did renew and recreate social diversity within the region. First in slavery, and we'll take a close look at slavery prior to the Civil War, and we'll see that much of the slavery in the region was indeed connected to industrialization. And secondly, after the Civil War, how the renewal of industrialization in the region and the rapid pace at which it occurred really drew into the region a number of different races and ethnicities. African Americans from the South, European immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, all were drawn into the region during this period of time. So there's a considerable number of topics in this unit. Fortunately, we had the benefits of a couple great essays that help lay out the main themes and give you a good roadmap of this large topic, industrialization of Appalachia. In the next introduction video, I'll go over some of the readings and some of the main themes that you should be underscoring.